The phone rang at 6:42 in the morning, and the voice on the other end belonged to a man Earl Whitaker hadn't spoken to in 9 years. "Earl, it's Dale. Dale Brennan from the survey office. You need to drive into town, right now." Earl was already standing at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee, watching the light come up over the east field. He didn't answer right away. That was the kind of man he was. "They broke ground this morning," Dale said. 6 o'clock sharp. $22 million mall, Earl. Concrete trucks lined up halfway down County Road 14. And the access road they're using, the one cutting across the back of your property, they don't have the right to use it. Nobody does. Not without your say. Earl set the coffee down on the counter. He looked at the calendar pinned to the wall by the refrigerator. May 7th, 2026. Then he looked at the door that led down to the basement, the door he hadn't opened in 11 years. "Dale," he said. "Who's the developer?" "Meridian Capital Holdings, out of Atlanta. They're calling it Whitaker Crossing." Earl was quiet for a long time after that. Then he said, "I'll be there in an hour." He didn't hurry. He poured the rest of the coffee into the sink. He washed the cup. He went down into the basement and stood at the bottom of the stairs in the dark for a moment before he pulled the chain on the bare bulb hanging from the ceiling joist. The cardboard tube was where Marcus Whitaker had left it in the spring of 1972, leaning in the corner behind the workbench, wrapped in oilcloth, tied with twine that had gone soft with age. Earl took it down, held it for a moment, and carried it back up the stairs. His name was Earl Whitaker. He was 71 years old. He lived on 340 acres in Crawford County, Tennessee, on land he had not been born to and had not bought. Marcus Whitaker had given it to him in 1971, 3 months before Marcus died of a stroke at his own kitchen table at the age of 84. Marcus had no children. He had no family left. He had, by his own count, exactly one friend who had ever helped him without asking for anything in return. And that friend was a 22-year-old hired hand named Earl, who had spent 4 summers working Marcus's fields for fair wages and had never once complained about the heat or the hours. Marcus had called Earl into the kitchen on a Tuesday in March of 1971 and slid a folded paper across the table. "Earl," he said, "I'm going to sell you this place for $1. You're going to keep working it. You're going to sign one paper that says you understand what comes with it, and when you're gone, you do what you think is right with what's left." Earl had paid the $1. He had signed the paper, and he had worked that land for 55 years. The condition Marcus had attached was simple, written in his own hand on the back of the deed. "The East Access Road shall remain open to the Whitaker Farm in perpetuity, as recorded by survey of record dated 1961. That was all. Earl had read it once, the day Marcus gave it to him, and then he had folded it back the way it came and put it in a metal cash box in the kitchen drawer, where it had stayed ever since. The cardboard tube in the basement held the survey itself, the original, hand-drawn by a man named Howard Pickens in the spring of 1961, who had spent 4 days walking the property line with a transit and a steel chain. Marcus had paid him in cash and kept the original because, he told Earl once, "Howard's the only surveyor I ever met who measured twice and only charged once." Earl had not unrolled the tube in 55 years. He had not needed to. He drove the 40 minutes into Pulaski with the tube on the passenger seat beside him. He drove the same blue Ford he had bought in 2003. He didn't turn the radio on. When he passed the construction site on County Road 14, he slowed down but did not stop. There were 6 concrete trucks, 2 excavators, a trailer with the Meridian Capital logo on the side. A gravel road had been graded the day before, cutting in across the southeast corner of his property, exactly where Howard Pickens had drawn the easement line in 1961. Earl looked at it once and kept driving. Dale Brennan was waiting at the survey office on Madison Street. Dale was 63 years old and had been the county surveyor for 29 years. He was the only person in town who had ever asked Earl about the original 1961 plat, and that was because Dale, 6 years earlier, had been hired to update the county GIS records and had noticed a discrepancy he could not explain. "Earl," Dale said when Earl walked in with the cardboard tube under his arm, "I have to tell you something. Meridian filed for the building permit 11 months ago. The county approved it on the basis of a 2019 survey. That survey shows no easement on your property, none. The 1961 plat is not in the digital records. Somebody, and I don't know who, pulled it from the file sometime between 1998 and 2003 before everything was scanned." Earl set the tube on the counter. He untied the twine. He unrolled the survey across Dale's drafting table and weighted the corners with a stapler and 3 coffee mugs. Dale looked at it for a long time without speaking. "Earl," he said finally, "this is the original, with Howard's seal, with the county clerk's stamp from 1961, filed and recorded." "Yes," Earl said. "Their entire access road runs through your easement reservation. Every concrete truck on that site this morning crossed land they have no legal right to cross." Earl nodded once. "What do you want to do?" Dale asked. Earl thought about it. He thought about Marcus, sitting at the kitchen table in 1971, sliding the paper across. He thought about the handshake. He thought about the dollar. "I want to call a lawyer," he said, "and I want him to be a careful one." The lawyer's name was Thomas Reese. He was 48 years old, had practiced property law in Nashville for 22 years, and had been recommended to Earl by Dale because Thomas had once successfully challenged a state highway department over a 1937 easement nobody else thought was still enforceable. Thomas drove down to Pulaski that same afternoon. He arrived at the survey office at 3:15 in a blue Honda. He was carrying a leather briefcase and wearing a gray suit that had been pressed, but not recently. He looked at the 1961 plat on the drafting table. He looked at the deed Earl handed him with the handwritten condition on the back. He looked at the dollar bill Earl had kept, taped to the inside cover of the metal cash box, the one Marcus had handed him in 1971. Thomas was quiet for a long time. "Earl," he said, "I want to be honest with you. Meridian Capital is a billion-dollar firm. They have a legal team in Atlanta of probably 40 attorneys. They have already poured concrete. If we file this, they are going to fight it with everything they have, and they are going to argue that the easement was abandoned, that it was extinguished by non-use, that the 1961 plat is not properly authenticated. They will spend more on this case in the first month than your entire farm is worth on the market." "All right," Earl said. "I am not telling you we will lose. I am telling you they will make us prove every inch of it." "All right." Thomas looked at the plat again. He looked at Howard Pickens's seal in the bottom right corner. He looked at the county clerk's stamp, faded but legible, dated April 19th, 1961. "Earl," he said, "who else has seen this document?" "You, Dale, me, and Marcus Whitaker, who's been dead since 1971. Thomas closed his briefcase slowly. "I'll take the case," he said. The villain was a company before he was a man. Meridian Capital Holdings, headquartered in a 40-floor glass tower in Atlanta, with an asset acquisitions division that specialized in what their internal materials called frictionless suburban infill. Their model was simple. Identify a parcel of agricultural land within 20 miles of a growing city, locate the access constraints, acquire the rights to the necessary corridors through quiet purchases or through what they called boundary cleanups, and then build mid-tier retail centers on a 4-year construction to stabilization timeline. They had done it 47 times in 8 states. The man Meridian sent to handle Earl was named Garrett Holloway. He was 36 years old. He had an MBA from Emory and had been with Meridian for 9 years. He drove a black Cadillac Escalade and arrived at Earl's farmhouse on a Wednesday morning in May, 12 days after the lawsuit was filed, wearing a charcoal suit and carrying a black leather portfolio. He had spent, according to his own time records that would later be entered into evidence, exactly 2 hours and 10 minutes on Earl's case before that morning. Garrett knocked on Earl's screen door. Earl came out on the porch with a cup of coffee. He didn't invite Garrett to sit down. Mr. Whitaker, Garrett said, smiling, I think we can resolve this very quickly. I'd like to make you an offer for the easement reservation. We'd like to clear it from the title so we can proceed with the project. My firm is prepared to offer you a one-time payment of $85,000 for a quitclaim. That's substantially above any reasonable valuation. We'd need it signed today. Earl looked at him. No, he said. Garrett's smile didn't move. Mr. Whitaker, I want to be clear. If we go to litigation, the costs alone will exceed the value of your land. Your attorney will tell you the same thing. We're trying to be reasonable here. You can leave my porch now, Earl said. Garrett stood there for a moment longer. Then he laughed. A short, soft laugh. The kind of laugh a man laughs when he thinks the other person has just made an expensive mistake. There were 2 witnesses on Earl's porch that morning. Dale Brennan, who had driven out to bring Earl a copy of the GIS record search, and Earl's neighbor Hollis Maynard, who had come over to ask about a fence post. Both of them heard the laugh. Both of them remembered it. I'll see myself out, Garrett said. He walked back to the Escalade. He drove away. That afternoon, Garrett sent an email to his project director in Atlanta. The email would later be subpoenaed. It read, in part, Old man on the porch, won't budge, says no, doesn't matter. His deed is from a handshake, not a transaction. We'll bury him in motions. Construction continues per schedule. The auction was the part nobody saw coming. Meridian had financed the project through a syndicate of regional banks, with the largest stake held by First Tennessee Capital Partners. When Thomas Reese filed for an injunction in the Tennessee Chancery Court and the court issued a temporary restraining order on the construction 19 days later, the financing began to crack. 2 of the smaller banks pulled out. The construction lender called the loan. Meridian, suddenly facing a cash shortfall and a project that could not legally proceed, listed the entire 116-acre development parcel for emergency auction on a Tuesday morning in late June. The auction was held in the Crawford County Courthouse, in a room with wood-paneled walls and a single American flag in the corner. The auctioneer was a man from Nashville in a brown suit. The room was full. There were 22 bidders registered. There were 3 reporters from regional papers. There was a young attorney from Meridian named Rebecca Ward, who had been sent down to observe and to confirm that the parcel sold at or above $14 million, the floor Meridian needed to repay the construction lender. Earl arrived alone. He wore a clean white shirt that Marcus's wife Ruth had given him in 1968, the year before she died. He had not worn it in many years. Thomas Reese was already inside, sitting in the second row with the cardboard tube on the floor beside him. The bidding opened at $9 million. It moved quickly. It reached $13. $2 million within 4 minutes. The auctioneer was pacing the room, working the bidders. The gavel was raised twice and held. At $13, $4 million, the auctioneer began the count. Going once? Earl stood up from his chair in the back of the room. Going twice? Earl walked forward, slowly. He was carrying the cardboard tube. He did not hurry. The auctioneer paused with the gavel still raised. The room went quiet. Earl reached the table at the front of the room. He set the cardboard tube down on the table. He untied the twine. He unrolled the 1961 plat across the table without saying a word. The auctioneer lowered the gavel without bringing it down. Sir, the auctioneer said, what is this? Thomas Reese stood up in the second row. Your Honor, and I apologize, sir, you are the auctioneer, not a judge, but for the record, my client wishes to inform every bidder in this room that the access easement to this parcel is held in reservation by him under a 1961 plat of record filed with the Crawford County Clerk, currently the subject of a Chancery Court injunction. Any buyer of this parcel today is buying a parcel they cannot access without my client's consent, which they will not be receiving. The room did not move for what felt like a long time. The auctioneer looked at the plat. He looked at Thomas. He looked at Rebecca Ward, who had gone the color of old paper. Recess, the auctioneer said. 20 minutes. The auction was not resumed that day. It was not resumed the following week either. Within 96 hours, Meridian Capital Holdings filed for protection from its creditors. Within 30 days, the parcel was acquired by a regional conservation trust at a settlement price that included one specific term, negotiated in mediation by Thomas Reese. The access road across the southeast corner of Earl Whitaker's property would be permanently quit-claimed back to Earl, the gravel removed, the topsoil restored, the easement reservation written into the new title in language drafted by Earl himself. The damages awarded to Earl in the Chancery Court ruling that followed totaled $1,840,000 for trespass, for unauthorized improvement, for the cost of restoration, and for the value of the timber that had been cleared from the corridor without his consent. Garrett Holloway was terminated from Meridian Capital Holdings on the day of the auction. The internal email he had sent, the one calling Earl an old man whose deed came from a handshake, was read into the court record by Thomas Reese during the damages hearing. The judge, a woman named Patricia Donovan, who had been on the Chancery bench for 26 years, looked up from the document after she finished reading it and said, "Mr. Holloway, I want you to understand that the handshake you referenced was, in fact, the legal foundation of a lawful real estate conveyance recorded in this county 65 years ago. The fact that you did not respect it does not make it less binding. The fact that you found it amusing tells this court a great deal about your firm's standards." That was the only sentence she spoke that was not part of the formal ruling. Garrett Holloway did not look up while she said it. Earl drove home alone the afternoon the final settlement was signed. He did not go inside the farmhouse first. He walked across the south pasture, past the barn, past the old smokehouse Marcus had built in 1958, down the slope to the line of cedars at the edge of the creek. There was a single flat stone there, set into the ground, with the name Marcus Whitaker carved into it, and the dates 1887 to 1971 below. Earl had placed the stone there himself the summer Marcus died. He had cut it from a piece of limestone Marcus had quarried out of the back of the property in 1956. Earl stood there for a long time. He took his hat off. He held it in his hands. "Marcus," he said, "I kept it." That was all he said. He stood there a while longer. The wind moved through the cedars. Somewhere out past the east field a single crow called once and was answered. Earl put his hat back on. He turned. He walked back across the pasture toward the farmhouse, the same way he had walked it 10,000 times, the same way Marcus had walked it before him. The cardboard tube was rolled and tied, and back in the corner of the basement behind the workbench by sundown. The farmhouse light came on at the kitchen window at 7:14 in the evening, the way it did every evening. Earl wasn't the only one. Across 8 states, Meridian Capital Holdings had completed 47 projects on the same model, and at least 9 of them, according to records pulled by Thomas Reese in the months that followed, had run roughshod over old easements, old reservations, old handshake deeds belonging to other people exactly like Earl. Some of those people were still alive. Some of them still had the original documents in tubes, in drawers, in boxes their parents had labeled in handwriting that had not been read in 50 years. Their stories are coming. Same firm, same playbook, different documents, different counties, different dollar amounts. Subscribe. The next one is bigger than this. We'll see you there. Paste your script.